Good afternoon. Welcome to a webinar on stormwater finances in North Carolina. My name is Jeff Hughes, and I'm the director of the Environmental Finance Center at the UNC School of Government. And I'm here with several of my colleagues, and we're going to share with you some results of recent work we've done in the area of stormwater finance. Hopefully most of you by this time are familiar with webinars and GoToWebinar in particular, but if you're not, you can look in the slide in front of you and it gives you some basic instructions of what you'll need to know for the day. The little orange arrow at the top toggles back and forth. If you want to see your control panel, just hit that. If you want to hide your control panel, hit it again. The main functionality we'll be using later on in the webinar are for everyone to get the opportunity to type in the questions that they have. In order to expose the questions part of the control panel, just hit the little white arrow next to where it says questions, and that will pop up. And then anytime during the webinar today, you can type in a question if there's something you're not sure about that we present, or if you just have some comments or questions about things you'd like us to talk about, go ahead and type that in. As far as logistics go for the day, we'll be answering as many questions as we can, but we'll be telling you at the end of the webinar how we'll continue the discussion once the webinar is over. Just a quick few words about the Environmental Finance Center at the School of Government. We work on a variety of different tasks and services. We're part of the School of Government, but we are a separate unit within the School of Government that works specifically on issues related to environmental finance. We do applied research as well as teaching and outreach, advising, policy analysis. Did want to just do a little shout out to our organization's history. We turned 20 this year, and you can get a copy of our annual report off of our website. Also wanted to point out that we work both in North Carolina, as most of our colleagues at the School of Government do, but we also work quite a bit outside of North Carolina. Today's session is going to focus on most of the work we've done in North Carolina, but I know we have some participants from outside of North Carolina, and I think you'll find some of the things we discuss will have some relevance outside of North Carolina as well. Before we go into the results of some of our work, I did want to acknowledge some of our partners. All of the work we do is in partnership with one or more organizations, and this project is no different. I want to give a big shout out to the Division of Water Infrastructure, which is part of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. They funded some of this work, and we've been working closely with them on a number of different important policy and environmental issues across the state. The State Water Infrastructure Authority has also been a close partner in this work, as well as the State and Local Government Finance Division, which is part of the North Carolina Department of State Treasurer. A lot of the financial data that we've analyzed for this project, as well as a lot of our work, comes from the State and Local Government Finance Division and the relationship we have with that group. The North Carolina municipalities has been a partner in this particular survey, as well as I would say most of our North Carolina-oriented research. The North Carolina League of Municipalities has been a key partner. And we couldn't do most of our work without the partnership of actual utilities and local governments throughout the country, and in North Carolina in particular. And for this project, the North Carolina stormwater utilities are really the most important partner, and they provided us the information that we're going to share with you. And then we are part of a network of environmental finance centers that gets funding from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and wanted to thank them for their support of us as well. I'm going to start with a brief overview and introduction session on some of the financial needs of stormwater utilities in the state. I'm going to give you some information we've collected on the finance side of stormwater utilities, but most of the webinar today is going to be focusing on the revenue side of stormwater utility management in North Carolina, with a detailed look at stormwater utility fees. We're going to share with you some analysis that we've done, and we're going to give you some tools that you can carry out your own analysis. We'll finish up with a discussion of some general stormwater finance trends that we see occurring and that we found through this recent research, and then we're going to end with an opportunity for some open discussion and questions. We were pleased to have such a good response for our call for this webinar. We have registrations from throughout North Carolina, as well as several you'll see on this map from outside of North Carolina. So thanks again for those of you on the call, and we hope that this is useful to your work. All of this work is driven by the fact that in the area of stormwater, we are seeing increasing needs for funding. We are seeing increasing needs to invest in both hardware as well as programs, education programs in the stormwater area, and that's creating a need for revenue sources, which really fuels a lot of the growth of stormwater utilities across North Carolina and across the country. Just to say a few things about capital needs, unlike drinking water and wastewater, where there's been a number of organizations that have spent a lot of resources to try to get a fairly accurate estimate of needs, we don't have that national or statewide needs assessment to go off of for stormwater. We can pull some evidence from some of the existing studies to get some idea of what the needs are, but there's still a lot of work to be done, both in assessing stormwater needs as well as figuring out how to pay for those needs. Just to put things in perspective, the 2012 National Clean Water Needs Survey that EPA does include a stormwater needs assessment piece with a $19.2 billion estimate, but we really think that is low for an estimate for national needs. In the state of North Carolina, where we've participated with the Division of Water Infrastructure on a pretty deep dive into assessing needs on the water and wastewater side of things. We've done a little work in stormwater, but not nearly to the degree that we've done with water and wastewater. So just to put things in perspective, $17 to $26 billion in drinking water and wastewater capital needs, that does not include stormwater needs in that figure. Just looking at one watershed basin in North Carolina where there has been a pretty good assessment of needs through part of the Jordan Lake Nutrient Rule process, there's been an estimate of $500 million in stormwater needs just for one particular watershed basin in North Carolina. So again, you can see what that probably means for the state of North Carolina and nationally for that matter. The needs are enormous. As far as how important this is from a local government finance standpoint in North Carolina, the last year we had complete utility financials was for 2017. We should have the information for 2018 within a month or two, and we'll redo this calculation. But as of 2017, the stormwater utilities in North Carolina generated over $208 million in revenue. So clearly a very sizable local government initiative, local government revenue source. 9 out of the 10 largest cities in North Carolina reported significant revenues as part of their stormwater utility. 36 of the 50 largest cities in North Carolina reported revenue from stormwater utilities. A different way to look at the utility world is from the regulatory lens. 66 out of the 97 MS4 stormwater permit holders reported revenues in 2017. Relative to other sources of revenues in the local government finance arena, This is a little analysis we did to just put stormwater fees in perspective. We took 64 municipalities that reported utility fee revenue as well as other types of local government finance revenue in 2017, and we just mapped it and charted it to show you the relative magnitude of different revenue sources. Property tax is still king in North Carolina for local governments. You can see almost $2 billion worth of property taxes covered by these 64 municipalities that had stormwater utilities. Many of these municipalities also had water and wastewater utilities, and you can see quite a bit of revenue collected in the water wastewater sector, over $1.5 billion. But stormwater has become very sizable with, again, over $200 million. We noticed just recently that stormwater fees have surpassed another traditional local government finance revenue, that of solid waste fees. We now see stormwater fees being more important in magnitude for this group of municipalities than solid waste fees, which was not the case if we went back 10 or 15 years ago. So we know where people are from based on the registration. We'd like to know a little bit more about the professional affiliation of those of you that are on the call right now. You should see that popped up in front of you a poll asking for you to characterize your professional affiliation related to stormwater management. Please take a minute and fill that out for us. And I'll add, I don't think I said this at the beginning of the webinar, we will send out a copy of the completed PowerPoint with the results of these poll questions to everyone that's registered once the webinar is over. Okay, so hopefully everybody now can see the results in front of you. This is important. We wanted to know who was on the call, but it's also just important to reiterate that stormwater management really is shared by many different professions, many different divisions, many different departments. So we're pleased to have such a diverse representation on this webinar. But you'll see that we have folks that work directly within a stormwater utility, with about a quarter of the respondents saying they work directly with a stormwater utility. Quite a few folks in a local government that recognize the importance of stormwater management, and then quite a few folks that are advising. We also, the team appears to have at least a few elected officials that are making the decisions related to stormwater fees. So glad that some of you could join us from the elected official arena. Keep going back. If you work for a local government, please estimate your capital budget. Okay, we asked this question because, as I said in the beginning of the webinar, we don't have great figures about what the needs are out there. So for us, this is as much trying to understand more what kind of needs we're trying to fill. And you can see that in the last year, most of you have had some type of capital investment, but it's been a little bit more modest with the majority of you underneath 500,000. But we do have, looks like 6% between 500 and $1 million, and almost 17%, 18% with over $1 million of capital investment. So, this is clearly a local government function that requires revenue for both operating costs as well as significant capital investments. Now let's ask everyone to look forward with your capital planning and give us an idea of what you might be looking like moving forward. And this would be a 5-year total, and it's just to get an estimate. Okay, thanks everyone for sharing your perspective. Again, not a lot of surprises here, but we do see that we're going to need as a state collectively quite a bit of revenue to make the improvements in stormwater that we know need to be made for water quality as well as flooding and other purposes. This might be the hardest question for everyone. Based on those needs that you're facing, where do you think the majority of the funding is going to come from over the next 5 years? And we've put together a series of choices. One would be that you do cash financing using stormwater fees. Another would be that you use cash financing from taxes. Debt financing for those of you that intend to borrow from either a public loan program or a capital loan program on the open market or other. For this is one of the most interesting issues that we deal with in stormwater finance compared to some other levels of environmental finance is, as the survey shows, a lot of you use pay-as-you-go financing. We don't see nearly as much pay-as-you-go financing in other environmental sectors. If this was a webinar on water and wastewater, my guess would be that would be a much smaller percentage. The nature of stormwater projects being fairly modular and just historic culture of the way we've invested in stormwater systems across the state, we do see a lot of pay-as-you-go financing. We have seen a slight uptick recently in using debt to finance stormwater, and one of the things that we're interested in is moving forward, is this pay-as-you-go approach to stormwater finance going to continue? And if not, how will it be replaced? What type of debt might we start to see North Carolina stormwater utilities engaged in? Next slide. Okay, well now we're going to go to what I think most of you were most interested in. We're going to share with you the results of a recent fee survey that we did for stormwater utilities across the state. We've been doing stormwater fee surveys off and on for the last 10 years. We're going to share with you results from a survey that we just completed a few weeks ago, but we're also going to show you a little bit how some of the results from this year compare to some of the historic results that we've seen as far as the growth of stormwater fees across the state. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Evan Kirk, who is the research assistant with us that's done most of the survey work, and he's going to go through some of the results. I will say that we have a lot more results than what we're going to share with you on the webinar, and at the end of this webinar, you will receive an email that will give you access to some of our other resources that will let you dig a little bit deeper on your own with some of this analysis.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So here's a map of the stormwater utilities that we know of in North Carolina. We get this information on which stormwater utilities exist from a number of sources. West Kentucky University does a national survey. We got a bit of the pool from that survey. We also looked at MS4 permit holders and went in to see if all those permit holders had a utility or not. And then we also had surveys from previous years for the EFC that had a number of utilities that have existed since at least 2010. So this map shows the population as well in thousands. You can certainly see there's a number of utilities along the I-85 and I-40 corridor, as well as some utilities out east that tend to have a smaller population as you go further east. So just quickly by the numbers, this survey included 88 fee structures, 83 utilities in total. There were 80 municipalities and 3 counties. The reason why there are more fee structures than utilities is because some of the utilities had multiple fee structures, specifically some counties that had fee structures that were both inside and outside a watershed that had regulatory significance, specifically the Falls Lake watershed, rather. About 41.2% of North Carolina population is currently served by a stormwater utility. We could also go a little further and look at the number of people within cities that are serviced by a stormwater utility, and that number would be higher because a number of North Carolina residents live outside city boundaries. $6.68 was the weighted average residential bill for 3,000 square feet of impervious surface on a monthly basis, $80.16 annually. Weighted average means we made the bill be proportional to the population of the city when we were making the average number. So a city with a higher population, their bill will count more towards this number than a city with a smaller population. So as you can see, $6.68 monthly could be charged to a property tax bill, but it's still a stormwater line item. Could be charged to a utility bill, or it could be a standalone bill. And this is something that we're going to look forward to finding more information about in future surveys to see whether or not, or rather which method utilities in North Carolina use to charge their bill. And we can also compare the collection rates that these utilities have based off of the method that they choose to implement their bill. So here's the spread of monthly bills at 3,000 square feet of impervious surface for a residential customer in North Carolina. As you can see, the bills have a large range. There are some bills that are less than $1 per month, and there are some bills that are more than $11 per month. But the majority follows a pretty normal distribution. The majority are between $3 and $6 per month. And one thing that we will note, and we say it within our tables that you may find online as well, is that the level of service for these utilities varies pretty widely. So everybody who wants to do a comparison on stormwater bills in North Carolina should do that comparison with caution. Looking at the structures that these utilities actually use for residential and non-residential billing, residential tends to be a flat fee. And it also is more commonly a tiered flat fee than non-residential. And the reason why these utilities tend to choose flat fee for residential is because there's not a lot of variance in the size of impervious surface for residential customers. And because of that lack of variance, they're able to implement this flat fee to save on administrative costs associated with looking at the exact amount of impervious surface on each residential plot every few years to update that. A non-residential bill is more likely to be what we call a per ERU charge. People from the water and wastewater world might look at that as a uniform rate. Basically, we're going to charge that customer in increments of the number of ERUs, equivalent residential units that they have on their property. That tends to be implemented for commercial customers rather than residential customers because there's more variance among that customer class. You have anywhere from a small commercial store that may be on a very small lot within a strip mall or even on Main Street. And then you also have your big box store that might be on the edge of the city limits but has, many thousand square feet of impervious surface. It makes more sense to have distinct charges for those two customers because of their vast difference in stormwater production. So going forward, a few interesting trends that we've noticed. This past year we had 2 new utilities in the survey. I found out in a conference in Charlotte a few weeks ago that one of these was an existing utility that was created in 2012, but we know for sure that one of them is a distinctly new utility, and that's our neighbor Carborough. Annual adjustments to these rates. Since the last rate survey we completed last year, there have been 13 utilities to raise their fees, and one of them lowered their residential fees, but actually raised their non-residential fees. So that's an interesting way for you to see how each customer class carries the burden of paying these fees and also experiences the benefits of having the service provided. And then the variation in monthly bill has increased since 2010. The standard deviation was $1.40 in 2010. It's now $2.60. And the reason for this, as we'll see in this next slide, is because some of the utilities have raised fees pretty steadily. Other utilities haven't raised fees at all or have raised fees only a small amount. So for this slide, we used inflation data that we got from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And since 2010, there has been 15.2% in inflation. So there have been 16 utilities that have not raised their fees at a significant enough level in order to account for that inflation, just in the cost of consumer goods. Most of the utilities have raised their rates at a rate faster than inflation, and 8 haven't changed their rates at all. So this included 44 utilities that we have data for all the years within the survey. And again, we have 88 fee structures now. So this is about half of those utilities that we have in the survey. So now I'll pass it back over to Jeff, and he'll talk a little bit about the regulatory framework and their effect on fees.
The slide, thank you, and the slide that Evan showed where so many utilities haven't even adjusted their fees in the last 7 or 8 years reinforces something that we've seen in our work in this area, is that the stormwater fee itself in many communities is not directly proportional to stormwater costs or stormwater needs, which is really important. In the water wastewater sector, we see more of a connection between costs and what water and sewer rates are. Not always a connection there, but more of a connection. In the stormwater world, we see many folks implement a stormwater fee and they're unable to adjust the fee after they implement it, and they are doing what they can with that revenue, but it's not directly proportional to their management abilities as a stormwater utility. It's not directly proportional to their needs. So just to reiterate what Evan said, it's very difficult to compare stormwater fees across utilities and feel like you can understand the management efficiency of one utility over another. The fact that one utility has a lower rate doesn't mean that they're running their stormwater utility any more efficiently. It might be that they just have not been able to raise their rates to keep up like they would like to. We do think that there are some driving forces that influence the cost of stormwater, and we continue to do research in this area. This is just one example of something that we are tracking. It's the impact that stormwater regulations have on fees, and you can see that across North Carolina, the stormwater utilities that are in areas that are not governed by MS4 permits tend to be a little bit lower than the stormwater fees in either a phase 1 or phase 2 community. Maybe that's the driving factor of what's causing the fees to be higher or lower, but there's certainly other issues that are impacting those fees as well. We realize that we just gave you a small glimpse of the stormwater fee landscape. We did want to point to your attention a tool that we are going to be launching momentarily. It's a dashboard similar to the stormwater fee dashboards that we've done in past years. It's essentially a visualization that lets you access our database of stormwater information. And what you're seeing right here is a screenshot of this year's beta version of our stormwater fee dashboard. We'll send everybody a link to it after the webinar so you can get in and play with it yourself. But this tool lets you pull down a particular stormwater utility in North Carolina, develop a peer group that you want to compare yourself to, and find out some basic information about your stormwater fee and other stormwater fees across the state. As you'll see in this screenshot, We also this year have the revenue generation from the different fees. So in this example, you see we pulled the city of Asheville up, and you can see that Asheville's fee as of 2018 was a little under $5 for a property that had 3,000 square feet of impervious surface, and that fee generated about $5.6 million. You can use this tool to do a little bit more precise analysis. Here's an example where we're looking at the City of Durham stormwater fee, which you can see came in at about $6.75 for a property with 3,000 square feet of impervious surface. That generated about $18.6 million in revenue. But we do have some supplementary information in our databases, and you can see in the table below the bar charts that we show Durham compared to a peer group of communities that are within a 50-mile radius of Durham. So that's the peer group that we chose for this analysis. And you can see that we have presented both the fee as it compares to Durham's peer group within 50 miles, as well as the annual revenue, the median household income, and then what I find particularly interesting is the density. And you can see that Durham is a fairly dense community, 961 people per square mile, considerably more dense than many other communities in North Carolina, and this shows up in this comparison. So you could make the case that, yes, Durham is charging a little bit more for their stormwater fee than some of their peers, but they are in a situation that is a lot more denser population, probably more impervious surface, more flooding issues. So you can start to carry out analyses like this. Before I get to the next slide, I wanted to say another word about our dashboard. We have experimented with different models of dashboards for stormwater utilities over the years. We're in the process now of considering some new functionality for our dashboard, and we would like to ask if any of you on the call would be interested in becoming a beta tester for our stormwater dashboard. So this is just a request for volunteers. The dashboard I just showed you is a work in progress, and we're going to be looking for a group of 10 to 15 stormwater managers from across the state that will participate with us in testing out the stormwater dashboard functionality and actually providing us some comments about things that you don't want to see in the dashboard, things that you would like to see. So it gives you an opportunity to provide feedback. These tools are really for the benefit of the people that are on this webinar. So we want to make sure that we do the best job we can at doing something that's useful for you. Okay, next slide. All right, we're about to wrap up and turn over to some time for just questions. We did want to make a point that in the world of stormwater management, there's a lot of variation to what we see people using the fee revenue to cover. And that gets to a little bit of our comments and our findings related to what drives these stormwater fees. This is an example of a stormwater analysis, fee analysis that was done for a community in North Carolina recently. And you can see of the stormwater fees collected in this particular community, quite a bit of the revenue is going to go for non-capital expenses. And this is something that we see across the state. Stormwater is a service that requires the investment in capital, but it's also a service that requires an investment in labor and investment in education materials. So we just did want to point this out, that many of the stormwater fees that are in place right now are only covering a fraction of the capital needs in those particular communities. And that's something that we're tracking closely. We think, based on their answers to the poll we did a few minutes ago, that there's a lot of unmet capital across the state, and we think that stormwater fees are probably going to be one of the best sources of revenue for dealing with that capital moving forward. But we are interested to see whether there's going to be sufficient revenues from existing fees to cover much capital, because we know right now that many stormwater fees are already accounted for in covering things like street sweeping and covering mapping of illegal discharges, field services. So it's just a point to make to you. We're going to finish up with some questions related to capital investment, and this is all going to our future, to understanding what's going to look like in the future next couple of years in North Carolina as we do start to make progress on some of these big capital needs facing the state. Now, we're going to go with a few comments about general trends. I've already mentioned that we're very curious about how we're going to fund large stormwater capital moving forward. Some other things that we've noticed in our research is that stormwater utilities are now looking at new tools that they can use for stormwater management beyond just implementing fees. We're seeing a number of utilities struggling with whether or not to provide waivers and exclusions to certain properties. In some cases, this has not been a local decision, as we saw in North Carolina a few years ago with a state law that excluded airports under some circumstances. But we are dealing with that moving forward. And as fees get more and more expensive, I think there's going to be more and more pressure by certain property classes to try to get an exclusion. So it's something that we're watching closely. We're seeing a number of utilities moving toward trying to incentivize investments on private property by offering fee credits to stormwater properties that take some initiative on their own property. That's something that we're tracking carefully. Cost share programs have been established in a number of utilities over the years, but the uptake on those programs has been fairly modest to date. We're seeing a few communities. We worked a little bit with Raleigh over the last couple of years on their cost share program to increase the uptake on those programs and try to have those programs as an integral part of the utility's overall stormwater management strategy. And those programs can be set up as grants, they can be set up as loans, but they all revolve around trying to encourage properties to take action on their own so that stormwater management doesn't become the sole responsibility of governmental entities doing installations on governmental property. We're seeing a big movement to trying to do institutional installations on schools, on commercial areas like malls and shopping centers, and local governments are realizing that through their fee programs, through their cost share programs, that they can incentivize those types of investments. We're seeing some communities like Durham turn to much larger stormwater projects that will be difficult to fund on a pay-as-you-go basis. In the case of Durham, they're looking at a multi-million-dollar wetland installation. We've seen some of these projects start to pop up. As I've said, we're looking at the increased use of debt financing as a trend that will impact fees moving forward. We're also seeing a lot of buzz about this concept of pay-for-performance procurement. Not quite as much in North Carolina, but for those of you in the stormwater industry, there's a number of examples where communities are turning to some type of new procurement mechanism to share risks for innovative stormwater installation. And the one that probably got the most attention is in Washington, D.C., where the bond interest rate was impacted by the success of a project itself, which was really innovative in a number of ways. but we're starting to see some discussion about that occurring in North Carolina. It might be something that we get a chance to work on as a state moving forward. Wanted to get some more opinions about where everybody on the call is with their management initiatives. First off, I'd like to ask everyone, how likely do you think it is that your program will borrow money for a stormwater project in the next 5 years? You answered this in some way already, but put this way, let's see what we have. Okay, this is an area that we're going to watch closely. Interesting that we have a full 40% of the utilities that are unlikely to borrow money in the future, but the rest of you, it looks like that's at least a possibility. So we're going to want to watch this space carefully. I spoke a little bit about the fee and credit programs. We've done some research in this area in the past and are willing to continue to work in this area. We are curious if this is something that a lot of people are talking about and whether we should be working to provide some more resources in this area. We'll give people a moment to think about that. Okay, we'll quickly share the results of that. Okay, it looks like something that we're going to continue to watch. It looks like quite a few of you are determined to work more in this area, and there's been a lot of interesting work in some other states in this area, and there are many, many examples of fee programs that have been created that have been underutilized, and some other examples of things that people have done to really have a major impact on stormwater management in the particular community. So it's an area that we'll definitely be paying attention to moving forward. Next question. The next question relates to the cost share programs, and these programs have been created in a variety of different ways, but we are curious if for those of you that have them, if you're interested in modifying your programs, and for those of you that don't have a program where you provide some financial incentives directly to a private property owner, whether you might be looking at that area. Okay, thank you very much for that. I think at this point, we want to just mention a few resources, and then we're going to open it up to questions. We'll send out some links to these resources after the webinar is over, but all of our applied research gets pushed out on our environmental finance blog. So hopefully you'll consider, if you're not already registered for that, you'll consider subscribing to that. We also have, as I mentioned, a stormwater fee dashboard that will be rolling out very shortly, as well as our listserv, which many of you, I think, are already on. It's the main place where we advertise our stormwater trainings and our research findings. What's not on this list is we will be running a 2-day stormwater finance workshop next December. Everyone that is on our listserv will get notification of that well in advance. That 2-day workshop will cover many of the issues that we addressed on this webinar. With that, I think we have about 15 minutes left that we're going to deal with any questions that we received. And I think we have just one or two. So let me go to that. Okay. The first question is whether we have seen evidence of a municipality using true cost-based methods to set a rate structure with different rates for different customer classes beyond residential versus commercial. And that's actually probably a twofold question. We have seen some rate structures that have another customer class, possibly a multifamily class. So we have seen some more complicated rate structures where there is some effort to allocate costs a little bit more accurately among customer classes. As far as doing a full cost-based rate structure, we've seen relatively little of that across the state. Generally, we've seen more stormwater fees set at a flat rate, that $2 a month, $4 a month, $6 a month. That was easy to explain. And then adjustments to that fee over time coming in, $1 or $2 increments. Stormwater full cost pricing is challenging because there are some communities that have stormwater utilities that are not committed, and possibly for good reason, to using stormwater fees to cover all of their stormwater management costs. We know of some communities that have said fees will cover a certain percentage of their costs, but they want property taxes and other revenues to cover a portion of the costs. We haven't seen very many stormwater utilities that have spent a lot of time looking at the true cost of their existing capital, like we see in the water wastewater world. For example, just knowing all of the stormwater assets, the culverts, knowing what the depreciation is every year of those assets, making sure that the revenues cover both depreciation as well as renewal costs. I have yet to see what I would say is a full cost rate survey that's been done, rate study that's been done. They're probably out there, but I haven't seen one like I've seen on the drinking water side. This was a question that is probably better suited for our listserv because it goes out to the entire population of stormwater utilities. But someone asked if for non-residential properties like shopping centers, is anyone charging individual tenants a stormwater fee rather than the property owner itself? And this is a good time for me to say something that I forgot to mention earlier, in that, as you saw today, this survey focused almost exclusively on fees themselves. In past years, we have done surveys that looked at fee practices, like whether utilities build their fees on water bills or whether they build their fees on property tax bills, whether they sent the fees to property owners or whether they sent, as this question asked, sent it to tenants, like in a strip shopping center where you would have each tenant receiving a portion of a stormwater bill. We haven't done that, so I can't answer the question for this particular question right now, but I will say that our goal is to do a much more elaborate stormwater practices survey this summer or fall for next year. So again, that would be something that if you are interested in, or if you have questions you would like us to ask in the future, feel free to let us know, and we'll try to incorporate those questions.
And I will just add that the billing method itself will sort of dictate who receives that bill. If it's a water bill, if the tenant has the water account under their name, the bill will go to them and they'll pay the bill. If it's a property tax bill, it's going to go to the property owner. And if it's a water bill for a multifamily customer, if they have an individual meter, they'll receive the bill. But if they are not sub-metered, like many apartment buildings are, then the apartment manager will receive that bill. So generally, the billing type will dictate who receives the bill.
The next question is very interesting. It's much more, I think, of a strategy question than a kind of a pure finance question, but it asks, in order to avoid rate shock from citizens, what would be a reasonable fee increase for a utility that has not increased its fee in over 8 years? It's a great question. It's a question that we also do get in the drinking water and wastewater world as well. Our recommendation for stormwater utilities would be the same that we've been recommending for water and wastewater utilities for years, is that having multi-year rate adjustment plans to the extent that you can do the modeling for those is always going to be in your best interest. So if you're trying to make up for 8 years of no adjustments where your costs have probably been adjusting in those years, I would implement a multi-year rate increase. In pure percentage numbers, it's a lot of it's going to be how you present the fee increase. I think we are seeing fee increases in some cases from a percentage standpoint of 10 or 15% in the stormwater world, but that 10 or 15% might be the equivalent of 50 cents per month, a very small amount. So I would focus on looking at the peer utilities across the state, trying to figure out what a reasonable amount that people are currently charging, look at your existing costs, and go through some type of five-year increase with the first few years at the higher end to get you closer to the median or even the 75th percentile. Okay, we're starting to get quite a few questions in. What percentage of North Carolina stormwater utilities are standalone versus former water and wastewater utilities that brought in stormwater too? That is definitely the kind of question that we're going to ask in detail in our management survey. Just anecdotally, we still see the majority of stormwater programs within a public works or engineering department in local governments. We have started to see in the last few years some intentional shifting of stormwater utilities into a more integrated water management function. We've seen, at least in 3 or 4 large municipalities, a decision made to move stormwater under an umbrella of water resources. There's a national movement that is promoting a one water approach to water management, and that's coming out. But my guess is that that is still the minority of utilities in North Carolina. It might be 10 of the 80 are integrated and 70 are right now standalone and not integrated into water and wastewater utilities. But that number may change in moving in the future. Are most North Carolina fees based on impervious area? What was the diversity in measured units in the survey? I'll let Evan talk a little bit about that question.
There's only one fee structure that is within a separate enterprise fund that is not based off of impervious surface, and that's a utility on the Outer Banks that charges based off of the millage rate. They just recently raised that this past year from 1 cent per $100 valuation to 2 cents per $100 valuation. So that was a 100% increase, but it's still a relatively modest fee for the property value size that they have there. What was the second part of that question, Jeff?
The diversity in measured units in the survey, so ERU diversity.
So generally the ERU is between 3,000 and 5,000 square feet. And in order to see what the ERU should be for each community individually, that would be a study that you would have to do on a community-by-community basis to see the average size of a single-family residential property. Some of the utilities just skip that step and just go directly to basically a per-unit rate that is either based off of 1,000 square feet, that's what their uniform rate would be in increments of, or they just go to an acre, so 43,560 square feet. That actually seems to be pretty common in Mecklenburg County specifically. So some utilities don't even bother to see what an ERU is in their community, and that's probably okay too. So it just depends on what the local government wants to see, and then you want to also make sure that it's going to be legally defensible based off of state law.
Okay, we're drawing to a close. There's a number of additional questions that came in, many of which are going to be are going to inform the way we do our management survey. There are questions related to the governance and institutional structure of stormwater utilities, which is definitely something that we have focused on in the past and will continue to focus on. Let me get the answers to one or two of these questions, and then the rest we will be chewing on and continue to look at. And as we get information on those questions, we'll be putting it out on our research blogs, we'll be covering in our classes. But someone did ask about a model stormwater ordinance out there. There is a model for a phase 2 stormwater ordinance that the school of government worked on with the Department of Environmental Quality a number of years ago, which is up on our website and available on the Department of Environmental Quality's website. There's a question about a couple questions related to whether communities have residential drainage assistance programs or whether utilities perform work on private properties. Those are both things that we would consider to be underneath the large umbrella of cost share programs. We have some rough numbers of those programs from last year that we can put out, but it was a minority of programs that are doing that work on private property now, but it does seem to be growing. There was an interesting question that I'll end on, which was if we had done any correlation between the governance structure of stormwater utilities related to their ability to charge full cost fees. In other words, our municipal stormwater utilities that are a municipal department, are they managed any differently than, say, a standalone water and sewer authority or stormwater authority? And to date, we have not found a special purpose entity in North Carolina that just provides stormwater services. So all of the stormwater utilities that we've been tracking are part of municipal government and are part of county government, even though the state statutes do allow for the creation of special purpose units of government just for stormwater management, but we haven't seen any of those. So the answer to that question is fairly simple, is that right now all of our stormwater utilities in North Carolina are run as city and county governance structures. Very different than the water and wastewater world, where there are a number of special purpose units. Sorry we can't answer the rest of the questions. Hopefully this started to give you an idea of what the kind of work that we're doing. We did want to ask you one more poll question as we close, and then look for some emails from us with follow-on materials. And again, thank you very much for your time. Before you head out and turn your computer off, if you could just answer this last poll question, we'd very much would appreciate it. And thank you very much.